All right, so this is the first part of agency. We've just left warranties, product liability, consumer law land. And we've talked quite a bit about contracts, so you're going to see a little of that here in agency. And believe it or not, you probably have some experience in this area. For example, how many of you are agents? Well, you can't get this on the recording, but everybody's hand's going up. Wow. If you're a secret agent, put your hand back down. Okay. Well, what is? Let's start with this, and then I'll ask the question again. So, what is an agent?
Someone who acts on behalf of someone else.
Close. And this the textbook and the slides. I don't think do a complete job of this, but an agent is somebody who acts for somebody else, known as the principal. But as they deal with who? Yeah, I'm going to call them 3 Ps. Third parties. So, has anybody ever worked for someone else and dealt with third parties before? Okay, yeah. How about this one? Is anybody employed? No. Okay. So I'm seeing more hands. Now, here's the question. Who do you work for? What movie was that? Never mind. Jerry Maguire? No, that's not what I was thinking of.
So, like, we work
for the principal. So if we're an employee, we might be an agent. We might be. If the principal is the employer, but only if we deal with third parties. So is there anybody in their job who deals with customers or the public or suppliers? Oh, look at that. More hands are going up. Good. So anytime you're employed and your job is to deal with third parties on behalf of your employer, you're an agent. Okay. Now, I hesitate to go there right away because then you might think that all employees are agents. I'm not saying that. But some of them are. Who would be an employee that's not an agent? What's that? Maybe. So an employee who's not an agent is an employee who never deals with a third party on behalf of the principal. Well, I don't know about that. I think CEOs probably do. How can you be a CEO? I mean, I suppose it's possible. And never deal with anyone on behalf of the corporation. You know, like just sit in your office and golf or something. I mean, you're going to deal with somebody. You're going to speak to the public on behalf of the corporation. You're going to go somewhere and represent the company somewhere. Speak at some meeting. I mean, I think you're going to. But somebody's got to have a job where they just sit and do something or stand and do something. And they don't have to deal with the public. They just do their job. Maybe. So maybe you're support staff somewhere where you never deal publicly. You just sit in a factory might be an example. You know, you're doing a job for your employer, but you're not an agent. You're just an employee because you don't deal with the public. You're just doing, I don't know, you're putting a part into something. Right? So, if you're taking notes, some employees are agents. Not all employees are agents. And we're going to see in a minute here that not all agents are employees. I don't know if you caught that last one. Not all agents are employees. In other words, there are some situations where this person here, this agent, is not an employee of the principal. There's something else. Anybody got to guess what they are if they're not an employee? Right? They might be a subcontractor. It might be an independent contractor. So we'll talk a little more about that. In fact, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the difference between an employee and an independent contractor, this agency relationship, the duties that agents and principals owe to each other, the liabilities that there might be out there, and the termination of that agency relationship. Like I said earlier, we're not going to get to all of those. But I did want to add right away something to the slide, and that's that top bullet there, that they define an agency as working for a principal. That's only part of it. What are they doing for the principal? They're representing the principal to someone else in some other transaction. Okay. So it's really important to understand this for business, because without it, businesses can only deal with one person in one location at one time. So if you're national or international, you've got to have folks that work on your behalf and deal with other people. And the last bullet up there says, the principal has the right to control the agent and matters entrusted to the agent. Or another way of looking at this is the principal shouldn't be dealing with the agent as to things that aren't part of the agency. So if your boss tells you to do some things, that's part of your job. Other things are not. Now, I'm not recommending that you don't do things that are not part of your job, if you want to keep a job, but you've got to determine what that is. But generally, the principal should be directing your work as it relates to the agency. But we're going to see that in some situations, the principal is not going to spend a whole lot of time directing the agent what to do. Could one person have multiple roles? Let's start with that one. Could I be an agent because I'm representing the principal of the third parties and be an employee who doesn't work as an agent?
One person could have multiple jobs. Or
Right. So a person, what I'm saying here is don't tie it down to a person. Don't think, well, that person is only this or that. A person could have multiple roles. So as to one transaction, they got one role, but a person could have multiple jobs.
In my job, I have multiple roles because if I'm working in the shop, I don't deal with customers, but if I'm out on an install, I'm dealing with customers sometimes.
Yeah, but overall, I think you have the authority in or out of the shop to represent your principal. Now, parts of your job, you may not be doing that, but those are all part of the same job, right? You're just in different locations doing different things. So overall, you have the authority. What if one of those people that you deal with out on the road comes in to see you?
They won't.
Oh, okay. Why not?
They can come and see this shop. They'll talk to my boss.
Okay, but so
Or
on
they'll talk to me and
location.
I'll report to the boss.
Okay.
I'm both.
How are you both?
because one of my jobs I work at a bar, so I interact with customers, and then another one I mow lawns, but it's not like it's for a company. So I don't ever see or talk to anyone that I mow lawns for.
Well, that's an interesting one. So, like, if they saw you, you wouldn't talk to them.
I don't know who it is. I just know what I'm doing. Like I
Okay.
just know what house to go to or like what place to go to.
Well,
Or talk to.
I don't think the test is whether you talk to anybody or not.
But I wouldn't know even if I was talking to them if it was the third party.
Oh, so it could be just a neighbor or somebody wandering around.
Like, I don't know.
You're on a lawnmower and you've got headphones in, and
I don't know who that is.
okay, so your only job is to mow lawns. You're not out there as an ambassador on behalf of. Right. I mean, there are those who have that multiple job, like the true green guy or gal, right? You know, they're out there and they're like, I was just in your area. They always talk like that too. I was in your area and I thought, you know, maybe your lawn looks like crap. That's what I always get. You know, like I was doing your neighbor's lawn. Look how great it looks. Look at yours. You need some help, don't you? Get out of here. All right. So yeah, I think people could serve in multiple capacities. I'll throw this one at you. In a corporation, there's going to be multiple agents, aren't there? There's not just one agent doing work. So part of it is figuring out who's the principal and who's the agent. This might come in handy at some point for you. Right? So I don't know, because I like to pick on Best Buy. You know, it's like they're becoming the only electronic retailer that has a store. You know, all the rest of them can't seem to keep a storefront. But so maybe they're doing something right. But what kind of positions are in Best Buy? You guys mentioned there's a CEO. I don't. There's sales. There's managers. There's cashier. Team leaders. Man, you guys know all about this. The Geek Squad. This is an excellent example. I like this. All right? So Geek Squad, they go out and do installs, or they go out and fix problems, and they are dealing all the time with third parties on behalf of Best Buy. As far as they know, they're not independent contractors. They're employees who drive around in vehicles owned by Best Buy, I'm guessing. But some of these people, I mean, certainly cashiers and sales, they deal with the public. And I'm guessing some of these managers or team leaders deal with suppliers or things like that. So what ends up happening is we end up deciding that, well, they're all agents, right? They all are on the floor, or they're all doing something where they have some connection with the public on behalf of Best Buy, and we get to the conclusion that they're all agents. But then someone says, yeah, but this cashier works for this manager, right? That must make the manager the principal and the cashier the agent. No. Don't think that way. There's only one principal. Who's the principal? The corporation. Everyone else, can the corporation do anything without agents? No, it's a legal entity. Best Buy can't, the buildings can't get up and do a thing, right? Even the buildings are, that we know of. Maybe they move at night, we don't know, but I'm suspecting they don't. So all these folks work on behalf of Best Buy. They might tell what other folks to do, but that's not the test. The test isn't whether someone else tells you what to do. The test is, what is your relationship to the principal? So all these folks are agents. The manager, the team leader, is not the principal. They also work on behalf of Best Buy. Okay?
If it's a small business, where there's an actual owner, is it the corporation or is it the...
Well, I mean, I guess that's part of the question is, what is the structure, or what type of entity is it? Like, let's say it's a sole proprietor. They're the owner. Maybe they have a name for whatever it is they own, but the buck stops with them. They're the principal, right? And if there's any liability, they have it. And if they tell other folks what to do, and those folks on their behalf as they deal with the public, they're the principal. The other parties are agents.
So it depends on what kind of business it is?
I think so. I think it would depend upon their corporate structure, too. I mean, think about corporations like Best Buy. We didn't mention them, but there's also shareholders, right? Shareholders have an interest in Best Buy, but they're usually not acting as agents on behalf of Best Buy. We don't have that situation in something like a sole proprietorship, right? There aren't all these other stakeholders. There's one person, right? So the nice part is you call all the shots and you get all the money. Yeah, that might be an exaggeration. But you also get all the liability. I mean, that's why you get the liability, because you're the principal. So, yeah, it would depend on what kind of legal entity you are. All right, so an agency relationship is a fiduciary relationship. You don't hear that term that often, fiduciary. Fiduciary has to do with trust. If you are a fiduciary, that means you're acting for someone else, not yourself. Can you act as an agent and make money for yourself? Sure. But not at the expense of and not in violation of the trust relationship with the principal. And we're going to find that an agent has a whole lot of power. In fact, let's start out with the general rule here. We had the principal, agent, and a third party. If the agent does their job right, if they act within the scope of their authority, it's like they're not even there. The obligation is between the principal and the third party. Let's try a simple example. What kind of agents have you heard of before? Sports agents? Okay. Lawyers can be agents. How about a real estate agent? Right? Let's say the principal is a seller. Third party is who? Buyer. If the agent does their job right and secures a contract to sell a home to the buyer, who's obligated under the contract? Is the agent? No. They're just putting this deal together. They are not liable for selling the home. So, if they do their job right, they don't have personal liability. But on the other end of that, if they're given power to do this, they have this is somebody you really want to trust. And we're going to talk about reasons why we really need to trust this person here. Now, I mentioned earlier the idea of an independent contractor. From your reading, so I know you all read this, what's the difference between an employee and an independent contractor? What? That is one difference, right? Tax season is upon us, April 15th, and did anybody get something that said, by the way, we paid you and didn't take any taxes out? Haha, good luck with that.
The independent contractor isn't controlled by the employer.
Yeah, that's the biggie. We're going to talk about a number of factors, but what he said is generally an independent contractor's work is not controlled by the principal, by whoever is contracting for the work. Versus an employee, they're told what to do, how to do it, when to do it, those type of things. So that's the biggie. Well, we'll go through a number of factors. Now, before we get into those individual factors that a court looks at, why do we care? Other than it's part of the group activity and on the final exam, why would we go through all the effort of determining whether somebody is an employee or an independent contractor? That's right. That's exactly the big issue is liability. General rule. If your employees do something for you, you're going to be liable. Independent contractors, they do something and you didn't control how they do it, generally you're not liable for what they do. Notice I kept saying generally, because I'm going to have a bunch of exceptions to that. Yeah.
So, for example, Grand Rapids Press people are independent contractors.
I don't know. I don't know if I can make that presumption. I guess it would depend on who you're talking about. His question was, people who work for the Grand Rapids Press, are they independent contractors or are they employees? I'm guessing it could be either or both. Yeah, let's not go that far yet. But I imagine there are people who work for Grand Rapids Press on an independent contractor basis who get some compensation, but they're just said, here's the paper, go do it.
If they throw the paper and break a window, who's liable?
Right. So one of the reasons why you like to use independent contractors is because you don't control their work, so they do it however they do it, and so they're responsible for what they do. Now, but if they're your employees, like there may be a chance that when you call into the Grand Rapids Press, you're talking to somebody. I say a chance because it might be you're talking to somebody somewhere else and you have no idea, what capacity they're serving in. But they might be an employee of the Grand Rapids Press, and they might say something that somebody relies upon, and then the employer might be responsible for that. And the tough part about that is you might be liable for what your employees do even if you told them not to do it. That's the tough one. We're like, whoa, wait a second. Yeah, I would never let them do that. I told them not to do that. But they did it.
Like if a cashier sells alcohol to a minor, then the company's the employee and the company.
Well, we have to be careful about what type of liability we're talking about here. Because when we get into these slides, we talk about criminal liability, civil liability, tort liability, tax liability. So there's a variety of different types of liability there. And there might be a criminal statute against something, and it's tougher to establish that the principal is responsible for crimes than it would be for tort liability. I think about the bartender example, in serving alcohol and whether the company has liability for that. Yeah.
So if that lady was an employment contract,
That lady?
from the cigarette company, that example,
Oh, okay.
then they won't be liable.
Well, you're going to have to clue people in on what you're talking about there.
It's from that example.
Right. Yes. Go on.
That they said it was beneficial to switch to light cigarettes.
So, let's presume that lady was a employee of the principal, and the employer never gave the people on the phone direction to steer people to lights. Let's say the person's just on the phone and they have a tendency just to kind of editorialize and give their own opinions about whether somebody should smoke light cigarettes or not. So they called in and they were told to not put the company on the line for any liability by making any recommendations about what you should smoke. But she's like, oh, honey, I don't want you dying, so smoke lights, right? Is that kind of what your question is? I think that if she's doing her job, which sounds like in that example she was, and she says something that another party ends up relying on, I think she might have liability, depending on what type of liability we're talking about, but I think the company would. Now, if she is answering the phone and she says, I'm going to kill you, then that's probably well outside the scope of her job and not something the employer could do too much about. Now, if they know she's running around telling people on the phone that she's going to kill them, then they ought to do something about that, or they will have liability for it. Just thinking that sound kind of odd, like I'm going to kill you slowly with cigarettes. I don't know. So here are some factors that the court considers when determining whether somebody is an employee or independent contractor. Couple things. First of all, consider. This is not a mathematical formula where the court says what are the factors and one side or the other wins. And these are things that the court considers. So this is when it gets to a situation where somebody's claiming employer or principal should be liable. Let's go through it and then I'll throw out a scenario at you. The first one we already mentioned is probably the biggest factor. Does the employer exercise a great degree of control over the details of the work? Now, I want to get you past one thing here. Notice it says employer. That makes you think that whoever is working for them is an employee. That's not what that means. Employer here means employing somebody to do work in some capacity, either as an employee or an independent contractor. Maybe it might be better to say principal, but that's the idea. Does the employer exercise a great degree of control over the details of the work? If the answer is yes, probably an employee. If the answer is no, probably not. Like I'm driving by a construction site. I see them building a house. I wonder, I'm cursed. I'm always thinking of relationships and things like bundles of rights and stuff, you know. And so I think to myself, are those employees or independent contractors out there, right? What time they're told to show up for work, if they're told to show up for work, what kind of work they're doing, etc. These are things that I'm looking at. If they're told when to show up, when to take their break, how to do their work, when to be done, probably a good chance there's an employee. Other factors. Is the worker engaged in an occupation or business distinct from the employer? So and my example of that is when we had our house built, my builder, who we selected, did a lot of his own work. He did cabinetry, he did woodworking, he did lots of different things, but there was one thing he wouldn't do. It was the same thing I wouldn't do. Can you guess what it is that he wouldn't do? No, well, yeah, he couldn't do that because he wasn't a licensed electrician, so legally he couldn't. No. It was drywall. Yeah, see, whenever I say drywall, it's like a 4-letter word. All right, most people are like, ugh, yuck, you know, no one wants to do drywall. Anybody out there like to do drywall? Yeah, really? Yeah, well, yeah, that's why I like it, but I don't. Like, yeah, I like saving money, but anyway, so he wouldn't do that work, so he hired people who were specialized. In fact, you ever heard of a helicopter parent? Anybody know what that is? Yeah, I probably shouldn't share this with you, but that means they're a parent who hovers over their kids about everything, including their education. But I was like a helicopter client of the builder. You know, I was always hovering around, watching what he was doing. You know, and so one week he said, "The drywallers are coming in. Don't come here." Of course, you knew what that meant to me, right? I had to go over and see what was going on. So he says, "I'm not even going to be there. So I'll check in once in a while, but they're going to do their job. The way they do it's not what I do. I'm not going to tell them how to do it." And basically, he'd show up maybe at night, put a little X pencil mark on something, or leave them a little note, but he did not tell them when to do the job, how to do the job, or anything. So I pulled up, and as I pulled up, I heard loud rap music in my house, right? So I go in the house and almost got ran over by 2 guys on stilts. It was weird. I just didn't even know what to think. And these guys were running. I mean, like, I can't run that fast with my legs. And they were running through the house, putting mud in the corners of the ceiling. It was just incredible. And they showed up in this big old clunker van with all kinds of mud and materials and stilts and a boombox, apparently. And they knew what they were doing. It takes me forever to put up drywall. These guys were, it was done. So their job, their skills were distinct and separate from me or the builder. Is the work usually done under employer supervision? Well, in that case, no. They just did what they did when they did it. Providing the tools, in that situation, they brought all their own tools. Like, think about a construction site. Are they pulling up in a company truck with the tools already there, or are they coming in their own vehicle with their own stuff, acting as a subcontractor? How is the worker paid, and how long has he been employed? That's a question mark. Because if you just look at when somebody's paid, that doesn't necessarily determine whether they're an employee or independent contractor. Has anybody ever done independent contract work? Okay. When did you get paid?
Whenever the guy would pay me.
I mean, you just work, and whenever that person had the money to pay you, they'd pay you. So it might work like that. Anybody else? When did you get paid?
I get paid April 24th every year.
Okay.
Once a year.
Okay. So not very frequently, right? So, and what does that have anything to do with the work? Like maybe you get paid after you do the work?
No, I get paid up front for the year.
Oh, nice. You get paid up front. That's cool.
Grant.
Okay. So sometimes you might get paid before you even do the work. Sometimes you might get paid whether you do the work or not. Right? A lot of independent contractors, though, get paid when they do the work. So they're not getting paid every week or every 2 weeks. They do the job, then they show they did the job, and then somebody pays them for doing the job. Okay. So also think about benefits. Like in most cases, independent contractors are not getting their insurance paid for, taxes taken out, versus as an employee, those things are usually taken out. And then the last one's a little insulting. It says, is there a great degree of skill required? If so, then you're an independent contractor. I don't think that's what, that doesn't mean like if you're an employee, you don't have any skills. Maybe. Actually, I know a lot of highly skilled employees. In fact, if you're an independent contractor with a high degree of skill, sometimes people hire you on to become an employee because of your skills or capacity. But I do find like those that have a high degree of skill, they end up being both. They might be an employee somewhere and then do independent contractor work because other people want their skills. Or they just do it for a bunch of different people. Sometimes it's called moonlighting. Right? You have an employer, and the employer says, don't do jobs other places, but you do. Right? So anyway, the court looks at these factors and tries to make a determination of which you are. So let me try it out. Let's see how you guys do. Oops. I'll give you the table so you can cheat. There's a truck driver, and he's driving down the road, and he sees a restaurant that he's going to take a break at, eat at. In fact, he's required to take this break. So he tries to pull into the restaurant. The restaurant's full. It's tight parking lot. He pulls in an authorized location on the side of the highway, and he walks across the street into the restaurant. Comes out 6 hours later drunk, wanders across the highway, gets hit by a Harley motorcycle. He's dead. The Harley driver's dead. The widow of the Harley driver sues who? The trucking. Very good. See, you guys are my smarter class, right? They go for the money, right? They're thinking probably the guy who was smashed in the middle of the road isn't the guy with the most money. So they end up suing everybody, but they want to get at the trucking company. So what do you think the first thing is they want to establish? Right, because remember we said the big reason why we're going down these columns is to determine whether they're employer or an independent contractor. Because they're employee, then there's liability in a lot of cases. So what are you going to look for? Before you even get through all these factors like how was his payroll done and all that, what might you look for? Right, whose truck is it, right? So they looked, and right on the side of the truck at the scene was the name of the company he was a driver for. It wasn't independently owned and operated, subcontracted out to different companies. He was an employee of the trucking company, right? And looked at these other factors, and then in the end they determined, yes, he was an employee. So now the next question is, was he acting within the scope of his authority when he did what he did? Because he's going to be liable unless the company is able to defend and say that he was out there, that he was not acting in any way on their behalf. He was outside the scope of his authority.
You said he was
If he was getting drunk,
taking a break.
that's outside of this scope. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, your mind quickly goes to, well, he was getting drunk. That's not something that the employer would authorize him to do, but you can come up with a scenario where that wouldn't matter.
I mean,
Well, let's say he was. Let's say it all started out innocently, right? I mean, he pulled out to the side of the road. He's authorized to do that. In fact, maybe he was required to do that. Can a trucker stop and get something to eat? Can a trucker stop and rest? Can a trucker stop and take a shower? Yes, all these things a trucker can do. But 6 hours later, and under the influence, not within the scope of one's job. So the court ended up finding, in that case, that the company was not liable. So what's that mean for the plaintiff? They're going to have to go after someone else, right? Because the employer was able to establish this was outside the course and scope of this person's employment. But you could change those facts. Let's say the trucker's driving down the road and the trucking company said, no distracted driving. Don't text. Don't all these things while you're in the cab. But the trucker's doing that. While driving down the road, within the scope of their job, they take their eyes off the road and maybe they fall asleep, maybe they text, maybe they do something. And the employer can say, I told them not to do that. But the law is probably going to say they were doing what they were supposed to be doing.
I mean, you can tell a truck driver not to crash a truck.
Right. Don't hurt anybody out there. You give that speech every time you leave. Don't run anybody over. Don't smash into any cars. Don't smoke crack while you're driving. You could say all those things, but they might do it. That's why if I have a buddy who is a truck driver, if he gets any tickets on or off the job, he's done. Yeah, but because why? Why? Because if you know that your employee is doing something bad in how they drive, then now you might have a liability for it if they do in the future.
So if they did smoke crack, would that still be in the scope?
I knew if I let that one slip out. So I actually have a crack smoking example. You're leaving right now, right in the middle of my crack smoking example? Oh, so I mentioned going to the bathroom, and now you're... Okay, go ahead. So when I was a prosecutor in Calhoun County, there was a truck stop between Kalamazoo and Battle Creek that was known for two things: crack cocaine and transvestite hookers. I'll tell you later how I know this, but so what truckers would do is they would stop at the truck stop. Within the scope of their employment or not?
Yeah.
Within the scope. And while they were there, they would rest. Now, along would come a knock at the cab, and it would be somebody selling crack. And some of them, knowing that that's where you stop to get it, would smoke some. Later, while impaired, there'd come another knock at the door. They'd be greeted by this person who appeared very lovely and asked if they could come up into their cab and rest with them. And then they'd get the crap beat out of them and their wallet stolen. Because that was the plan. Get them high, get up in their cab, beat them up, take their stuff. Now you might ask, how would I know? Because I would see all these guys pre-trial conference. And if they were a trucker, and I'd seen the police report, and they had a black eye, and they were claiming that somebody stole their money, I would know what happened. So anyway, so then the question is, what liability does an employer have for employees to do that kind of stuff? Probably not, right? That's the difference between a detour and a frolic. That's a frolic. Yeah, which probably spoiled it for all your Christmases to come. You think of frolicking in the snow. But A detour is you could drive off the highway to get around something. You could drive into the rest stop to take a rest. But once you start doing things way off, right? Like think about going to a conference on behalf of your employer. Maybe somewhere not near the job site, right? Could you still be working on behalf of your employer?
Yeah.
Sure. You could be representing them. Let's say you rent a car. Could that still be as part of your job as an employee? Could be, right? But it's what you do and when you do it that
So, like,
could cause the problem.
If you begin frolicking, whatever the court determines that as, but then decide to try and conduct business, say you're on a business trip, then you go to a casino, start
Right.
a hot tub, then you see someone in a hot tub.
Oh, whoa, okay, let's stop.
Decide to conduct business.
Right.
Make a deal or something.
Right.
Would that be back in?
Yes, so every case is, factually dependent. So there can't be any hard, fast rule on if it's this, then,
So, yeah, it's a
Right.
reasonable person decides what it's frolic.
well, it's the court.
Yeah.
But, they're going to look at what the situation is and determine if that's within the important words are course and scope of employment. Course means when you should be doing it. So it's possible to be doing something that you do for your employer, but not at all when or where you're supposed to be doing it. Like one thing I've done in the last few years is I'll help people move, right? And when I'm not going to help any of you move, by the way. And occasionally, what we do is the person who is moving couldn't afford to get a van or whatever, so one of the guys that was helping moving would bring a van or something from their work because they had access to that as part of their job to move these people's stuff. Well, they're authorized to drive the truck and they're authorized to move things with the truck, but not this stuff when they're doing it, like weekends or night or whatever. So that's the course. Scope is doing what you should be doing, right? And sometimes that can be pretty broad. Sometimes that can be real specific. Think about a cashier at Best Buy. What are they probably authorized to do? What's within the scope of their employment? Take money, talk to people, sell warranties. Other stuff related to that job. What's probably not within the scope of their employment? Stealing is probably not within the scope of anybody's employment. But, I don't know, entering into contract on behalf of all Best Buy stores or something. That's well outside the scope of probably.
Wouldn't that be what a warranty is?
Well, a warranty is in that situation is probably selling a contract to a customer. I mean the other way around, like somebody walks in and says, I'd like to sell my product to all Best Buy stores. Should I talk to you? And I'm like, sure, sign us up. Right, they probably are not authorized to do that.
Do you think if somebody drove like a company vehicle and did some kind of work for a company and maybe on their way through they pick up their kids from school or something and on the way to pick up their kids from school they get in an accident, that would count as not in the scope of their work? Because
Again, each case, I like the kid example much better than your example, but in each case it's factually dependent. Is it possible that you might have a company car and you're authorized to have it at home? Yeah. Right. Like we have a police officer across the street from us. Every day he brings home an unmarked car. It's his car. It's his vehicle. And it's been broken into. I just think that's so funny. But like last night was a great night for break-ins. Just because you can't hear anything outside. It was raining. It was thunder. It was lightning. So one time, sure enough, he was parking his car out in the street, which is not good practice for police officers. And somebody came by, did a smash and grab, back to picking up kids. So usually there's real strong guidelines around what you're authorized to do with a company vehicle. In fact, think about cars or even uniforms, like where you can wear and represent the company that you work for. All right. So, determining whether the worker is an employee or an independent contractor affects the liability of the principal / employer, and the type of liability we might be talking about, I mentioned earlier, is everything from tax liability. Generally, if they're your employee, you're taking taxes out for them. Contract liability, like I was just saying, your employee has to be authorized to enter into contracts on your behalf. If they're not, then they shouldn't be. And then tort liability. This is a tough one for people. Your employee commits a tort, you as an employer might be liable. That means the person working at McDonald's drive-thru gets mad and throws hot coffee in somebody's face. I don't know, I'm just making that one up on the fly. Could the employer be liable for that? Yes, because it's as if it's them. And if you know your employees have propensity to get angry and do things, you probably should get rid of them. Ever been to like Lowe's or Home Depot and they've got a forklift out? What do? Close off the aisles. They got a flasher going. They got a beep, beep going. They got, probably it's on a leash. There's like some other ground guide who's making sure no one's around and everything, right? Why are they doing that? Why don't they just go, hey, if that forklift driver wants to have races up and down the aisle, not our problem. Because they know if that person is doing something, driving that forklift, and commits a tort against somebody, they have liability for it.
The funny thing is when you go to put an application in, when I applied at Family Fair, they had it's a whole a personality assessment, and it's like, do you get angry and swear at people?
This is why.
But it's funny because who's going to say, yeah, I get angry.
Well, maybe it's like a rough filter. If somebody gets so angry at the question, no! Then you're like, okay, we don't want that person. But yeah, who's going to admit up front?
Yeah.
Maybe it's more of a interview type thing. Like, I see on the application you said that you don't get angry. Really? You never get angry? Let's say I do this. No, I don't know. But yeah, you're right. But I think it's to cover your bases. Like, you checked up front to see if this person is stable or not. Of course, unstable people will say they're completely stable, but at least you asked. That's the weird. No, I don't think so. If they think they are, they probably are not. But all right. So that case. Anybody look at that case? That case is a good example of that, where taxi cab companies might want to have the people driving taxis be independent contractors. Why? I mean, just because right, just like the forklift example, right? If they're driving around vehicles that could kill people, they probably don't want to have liability for that, right? And most taxis I've been in, they drive around like they could kill somebody. I was in Toronto one time, and I made the mistake of telling the taxi cab driver, like in the movies, I need to get to the train station. I don't care what you have to. I don't know what I was thinking. I should have just said, I don't care if I die or not, because the guy took off. He ran red lights. He was up on the side. No, he didn't get up on the sidewalk, but 3 near accidents. It was crazy. I did, because I was scared. I know. He's like, I just want the money. So anyway.
I don't ever see taxis in accidents on the side of the road. I'm surprised. They're good drivers.
You see, I see taxis that are pretty messed up. So they must have been in an accident. I don't know if they ever stop at the scene of the accident, but I know they hit things. So anyway, in this situation, they were treating the taxi cab drivers like they're independent contractors. So based on that slide we have up, what kind of things would they do to try to say, oh, they're independent contractors? Right, your cars, you take care of your stuff on your end. We'll just pay you. You figure out benefits and taxes and all those types of things, so that they wouldn't have personal liability. But if you read through the case, probably a good idea if you read through that case, because it will apply to a variety of different settings. The court could, end up saying that even though you called them independent contractors and you tried to treat them like they were, in the end you did some things that exercised control over what they were doing. And in this case, you told them when to do things, how to do it, what to wear, those type of things. Here's my point. Hopefully you're listening. Even though you claim they're an independent contractor, if you treat them like an employee, the law might say they are for liability purposes. Like there's this case where it was an auction service. Would you think an auctioneer is an independent contractor or an employee? I mean, think about all the things we said. Highly skilled, they can talk real fast, and they do it to a bunch of different parties. So probably you're an independent contractor. So this personal representative of an estate hired an auctioneer to auction off the estate. And the auctioneer and his staff are trying to do their job, and now here comes the personal representative onto the day of the auction and starts telling them what to do. Like, put that piece of equipment over there, sell that for this, do that. And pretty soon the personal representative tells them to put some equipment over here. Somebody who's on site gets injured, and then the personal representative says, look, they were conducting the auction, not me. Guess what the court said? You told them to do it. If you tell them to do it, then, so the moral of the story is if you hire somebody to roof your house, let them roof your house. Don't get up there with them and do it with them. Don't get up there and try to tell them how to do it. Because if they drop shingles on somebody's head, you want to make sure you had nothing to do with it. Okay? All right. So, the last bullet up there. Usually, if you're an employee and you do work for your employer owns that work. What if you're an independent contractor and somebody hires you to do work for them? Sometimes the question comes, do they own whatever you did, or do you? Well, most of you would say, if they hired you to do it, don't they own it? Right? Well, if you're an independent contractor, like think about, I'm an independent contractor. I don't do that these days, but I used to do estate plans, and I wasn't anybody's employee. They'd hire me. I'd do an estate plan. Well, then maybe I set up a trust. Well, when I set up a trust, now here comes somebody else that wants to hire me to do a trust. Don't you think I'm going to use some of the work that I did for this one client with the next client? Don't you think I'm going to have some kind of template? And then I fill it in, and then I tweak it for their particular situation. I take things out, I add things. That's what I'm going to do. So somebody might argue, well, I own what you did. Probably in a lawyer setting, most people would say, well, the lawyer owns the template, and those people own whatever they did for them. Right? Think about software. See how you could hire me? I'm a developer. You hire me to make software for you. I make a product for you. You would say, I own it, and I have the right to license it to whoever I want. Now, let's say I'm the software developer. Now I got this code. I'm running around making the same type of software for other people. Who owns it? So there's a potential that whoever I originally made it for is going to say, that's our code. You can't be selling it to other people or using it in other work. So bottom line is, if you get hired to do something for somebody, in that contract, you want to be real clear about who owns whatever you do. If you're hiring somebody to develop software for you, in the contract it better say you own whatever they made for you. All right. So let's talk about how agency relationships are formed. They're consensual. You're not forced into an agency. You act on someone else's behalf because you want to. unlike contracts, no consideration is required. You could do something for somebody else for nothing. Does that make sense? Have you ever done anything for anybody else for nothing? What's that? You might volunteer to do something. Right. You could act as an agent for somebody and not get paid to do it. So you have an agency relationship, but you might not have a contractual relationship supported by consideration. If you do have a contract, the third bullet is the clincher. It's the one that always gets people. Let's think about this like this contract here, right? A contract to buy and sell a home. The principal needs contractual capacity. The agent doesn't. So think about it. Remember back in contracts we were talking about the two parties of the contract have to have capacity to enter into a contract? That means the seller has to have the capacity to know what they're doing in selling a home, and the buyer has to understand they're buying a home, right? The agent doesn't. So think that through. That means the agent could be what? Yes? Drunk? A minor? Yes. Now, I'm not saying it's a good idea to hire a minor to sell your house, right? But what else? They could lack the competence or be mentally incompetent. Now, if you know this, you certainly don't want to hire them. But the point is, later, when the buyer makes a claim against you, the seller, it's not going to work to say, yeah, but my agent didn't know what they were doing. Because who signs the contract? The seller does. So the seller, as they enter into that contract, even though the agent negotiated it on their behalf, they need to know what they're signing. They need to understand what they're signing. In most cases, it's not going to work. Now, there's some defenses they could assert, like the agent committed fraud against them or something like that, but it's not going to work to say, geez, my agent was not competent in what they were doing. Right? You want to make sure that they are. All right, so, and then the last bullet. You can have an agency for any legal reason. So if it's illegal for you to do, you probably can't hire somebody to go out and do it for you. But as long as it's something lawful for you to do, you could have someone else do it for you. All right. Here's where things get a little tricky, I think. I think people understand agency by agreement. Like, not to confuse you, but how many contracts are in this situation up here where somebody's selling a home through an agent to a third party? There's at least two, right? There's this one, the sale of the home, but there's probably a contract between the agent and the principal, right? I will sell your home and I'll get a commission for it. So there's probably this contract too, right? And so that agency relationship is formed through an agreement, an agency agreement, where the agent, in this case, because they're a real estate agent, is required to disclose how they're acting as an agent. Anybody ever sold their house before? Or purchased a house? Okay, the agent has a responsibility to disclose who they're working for. Like I used to get that when I had a practice. I'd get people coming in, and they'd bring the other party to the contract with them, and they'd say, what should we do? And I would say, look, I'm your agent. I'm representing you. So I'd look at the other party and I'd say, like, if they came in and they're like, we're trying to skip all this, we're doing this ourselves, could you draft up an agreement to sell my home to them? I would look at the buyer and I'd say, look, I represent them. Everything I'm about to do is in their interest, not yours. Like the contract I'm going to write out for them is favorable to them, not to you. Don't even think that I'm giving you advice. You guys know how I'm about giving out legal advice. What do you think I told them to do? Get an attorney. Like, thanks for coming. It's great you guys got this worked out. I'd be glad to put a contract together, but it will be for my client, not for you. I suggest that when we do it, that you then go out and have someone else look at it. So you'd have to disclose who you work for in that situation. So that's the common way of agency relationships are formed, by some type of agreement between the parties. So when we were selling our house in Kalamazoo, we had several agents. We tried to sell it ourselves. That didn't work too well. And then we had a couple agents, one that we went through fairly quickly, and then finally one that sold our house. Agency by ratification is a little different than agency by agreement. I'll give you an example. When we were selling our house and we couldn't sell it, we told the agent, we'll sell it and anything in it except this one thing. I'm making this part up, but what would be the one thing? A rare family heirloom, a precious jewel the size of, I don't know, something that's in the house that somebody's walking through the house and they see it, they're like, I want that to go with the house. A vase, not a vase, but a vase, right? So, and a chandelier. So here we go. We're going to sell the house, and in writing, we've given the agent authority to sell the house and the furniture and anything in it except for the vase and the chandelier. Those came from Uncle... Who? Uncle Pete. All right. So open house after open house. Nobody expresses any interest. Finally, somebody comes through, and they're like, I'll take this house, and I'll give you the asking price for this house, but only if you sell that vase and that chandelier that belonged to Uncle Pete. Now, is the agent authorized to sell the house? Yes. Are they authorized to sell the vase and the chandelier? No, I've expressly told them not to in writing. So they're not authorized to enter into that agreement on my behalf. But they've been trying to sell the house for a year, right? So they say, I think we got a deal, right? And they come back to me. Now at this point, I have two choices, right? What are they? Sell it, I don't care, Uncle Pete, rest his soul. You know, it's going with it, right? Or, are you kidding me? I told you not to sell the chandelier and the vase. Slap. I suppose I could. Don't mess up my example, though. Right. So, either going to tell them yes or no. If I say yes to them, if I give them authority that they didn't have, that's called ratification. Ratification is authority that an agent gets after the fact that they didn't have at the time they did it. That's somebody coming to you who's not your agent, or who is your agent but wasn't authorized to do something, and you go, that's okay. I know you weren't supposed to do that, but I authorize it now. So if you're taking notes, beside agency by ratification, you write in agency after the fact. Person's not authorized to do what they did at the time they did it, but you learn about it and you know everything about what they did, and you say that's okay anyway. You guys have probably heard of to ratify something, right? So this is ratification.
What would happen then if they
did something that they weren't authorized to do?
and then afterwards it
You
wasn't?
say no, right? So they come back to me like, good news, I sold your house and everything in it. You're like, whoa, time. I told you not to sell the vase and the chandelier. They're like, I know, but we got a deal, right? They might have their own liability for doing something they weren't authorized to do. You don't. Unless the next slide. So thanks for that question. Unless you, the principal, in my example, the seller, do something at the time to lead the buyer, the third party, to believe the agent does have the authority to do what they did. I know that probably sounds a little confusing, but let me give you a scenario. You're having the open house, and you're there. You're standing right by the chandelier and the vase, when somebody says to the agent, I'll take the house if you throw those two things in. And you, as the principal, either don't do anything and agree to it, or say right there on the spot to the third party, sounds good. Notice you didn't use any language that says, hey, agent, you hereby have the authority to do these things that you didn't have before. You just lead the third party to believe the agent has authority they didn't actually have. And since you're there and you're the one that does it, then you're stuck with it. Remember estoppel? Remember that idea that you could do something that you weren't even really required to do, but because you promised it or said it, now the other party relies on it, and you can't back out. Okay. Let me give you another example. Let's say you have traveling salespeople, and they're authorized to go out and sell, expensive vacuums. And the one thing they're not authorized to do is to collect cash. Why not? It's a liability because somebody might take it from them, and it's a liability because they might take it, right? They're traveling salespeople. They might continue to travel, right? So, traveling salesperson comes, knocks on the door. Hi, I'd like to sell you a vacuum. And the customer says, oh, this is a wonderful vacuum. I'll take one. Here's the cash. And the agent is not authorized to take that cash. But they do. Right now, the principal has no liability for that, right? Because they were not given that authority. So they go back. I'll get your question in a minute. They go back to the principal. The principal, when presented with cash from the agent who's not supposed to have it, has a decision to make, right? If they take it, ship the vacuum, and cut a receipt to the third party, what have they just done? They've led the third party to believe the agent has authority to collect cash on their behalf, haven't they? What should they do if they don't want the third party to believe the agent has that authority? Tell them they can't take it. You're not authorized to do that. We can't take that. We don't want the third party believing you have that authority. Why is this so important? Because if they take it and they ship it and they cut a receipt, now here comes the traveling salesperson again. Knock, knock, knock. We'll take 3. They hand them the cash. Then traveling salesperson takes off with the cash. Vacuums never show up. Ring, ring. Contact the principal. Where's my vacuums? What do you mean? Yeah, we ordered 3 vacuums. We paid your agent cash. The agent's not authorized to do that. What do you think is going to happen? The court's going to say, you led the third party to believe the agent did have that authority. Let's take it even further. You have an agent who has customers, and they're authorized to do things with those customers. Then you fire the agent. The agent's ticked. The agent goes around to all your customers, collects money from them. And then customers wait around for a product and never get it. When you fire an agent, what should you also do? In the contract with him, but who else should you let know that they no longer have authority to act for you? The clients that they've dealt with, that you know about. Yeah, Comcast is. That's come up quite frequently in that situation because it's ripe for moonlighting. They may have employees or they may have independent contractors. So they're selling bundles. And then when somebody calls from an area, they just look to who's an independent contractor in the area and say, here you go. And then that independent contractor shows up looking like they are employees of Comcast and do whatever. And then later a customer's not happy with it. And Comcast's like, I don't know what hey, they're independent contractors. Take it up with them. So that can be a tough situation. And then, but the question comes back to, what, if anything, did Comcast do to lead the customer to believe that that person was authorized to do something? Right. So that becomes the issue.
What if they come in as Comcast?
Right, they do, don't they? A lot of times they do.
And it's still independent contract?
Maybe, maybe not. I'm telling you, like they don't have it on their shirt. They don't have it, it doesn't say it on the van. I mean, it says Comcast. I've had situations, same thing with other providers. It's just because somebody pulls up with the name on the side of their vehicle doesn't mean they work for them. All right, so agency by estoppel is different from agency by ratification. Agency by estoppel occurs when the principal does something to lead the third party to believe that the agent has authority that they don't have. Right? So that can form an agency relationship where there wasn't one, or it can put the principal on the line for something they shouldn't be on the line for because they do something. Right? So in the last minute we have here, let me give you an example. And we'll pick up on this when we start talking about authority next time. Somebody shows up at your place of business selling something, right? They claim they work for someone else. We're selling, I don't know, coupon books, toys, something on behalf of somebody else. That representation by whoever that is doesn't bind the principal if they don't work for them. Because anybody could walk through your door and say, "Hi, I represent so-and-so company." That's why I always slam the door on the Girl Scouts. I don't know. But it's what the principal does to lead you to believe they have authority that they may not have. That's the important factor. All right, remember, for next time, you need to be here next time. Go over those group discussion questions individually. I know some of you are doing that. And then come back prepared next time to get in your group and come up with your group answers.